Sarah Martinez had always been the quiet one in the corner office at Blackstone Financial. While her colleagues fought for attention in meetings, she worked late into the night, analyzing market trends and building financial models that most people couldn't understand. Her desk was neat, organized, and positioned where she could see everyone but remain unnoticed. Marcus Thompson was everything Sarah wasn't. Tall, confident, and loud, he commanded every room he entered. His expensive suits and flashy watch made sure people knew he was successful. He had joined the company 6 months ago as a senior analyst, and, within weeks, he was already making waves. Marcus believed success was about being seen, being heard, and making sure everyone knew your worth. The tension between them started during a client presentation in March. Sarah had spent weeks preparing a comprehensive investment strategy for Wellington Industries, a major manufacturing client. Her research was thorough, her projections conservative but realistic. She had identified several potential risks that could affect their portfolio and suggested ways to minimize them. Marcus had other ideas. During the meeting, he interrupted Sarah's presentation with his own flashy proposal. He talked about aggressive growth strategies, high-risk investments that promised massive returns, and painted a picture of wealth that made the client's eyes light up. His charts were colorful, his language was persuasive, and his confidence was infectious. Sarah's approach is too careful, Marcus said with a dismissive wave. In today's market, you need to take bold action. Conservative strategies won't make you rich. They'll keep you average. Sarah felt her face burn, but she stayed calm. The data shows that aggressive strategies in the current market conditions carry significant risk, she replied quietly. Our responsibility is to protect our clients' investments, not gamble with them. Marcus laughed, a sound that filled the conference room. That's exactly the kind of thinking that keeps small players small, he said, looking directly at the clients. You came to Blackstone Financial because you want results, not excuses. The clients chose Marcus's strategy. Sarah watched as they signed the papers, seduced by promises of quick profits and easy money. She said nothing, but she made mental notes. She also made copies of all the documentation and started her own private tracking system. Over the following months, the pattern repeated itself. Marcus would swoop in with his charismatic presentations, promising clients the world while dismissing Sarah's careful research as overly cautious. He won client after client with his bold approach. Meanwhile, Sarah continued her meticulous work, building solid, sustainable portfolios for the few clients who trusted her quiet expertise. The office dynamic shifted. Marcus became the golden boy, the star performer who could do no wrong. Management loved him because he brought in big accounts and generated substantial fees. His success was celebrated in company newsletters and mentioned in every team meeting. Sarah's work went largely unnoticed. Her clients were happy, but their steady, consistent returns didn't generate the excitement that Marcus's dramatic wins created. She watched as he received promotions, bonuses, and recognition while she remained in her corner office, doing the work she believed in. But Sarah had something Marcus didn't know about. Years earlier, during her graduate studies in economics, she had developed a unique algorithm for predicting market volatility. It wasn't glamorous or exciting, but it was remarkably accurate at identifying when markets were about to shift. She had never shared this tool with anyone at the company, preferring to use it quietly to protect her clients. Her algorithm had been sending warning signals for weeks. The same aggressive strategies that Marcus championed were creating dangerous bubbles in several sectors. The data showed clear patterns that historically preceded market corrections. But, when Sarah tried to voice her concerns, she was dismissed as being overly pessimistic. Sarah, you need to think more positively, their supervisor, Janet Williams, told her during a performance review. Marcus has shown us what's possible when you approach the market with confidence and ambition. Maybe you could learn something from his methods. Sarah nodded politely, but privately she increased her monitoring of the market indicators. She also began documenting everything more carefully. Every client meeting, every strategy decision, every warning she gave that was ignored. She created detailed records of the risks she had identified and the alternatives she had proposed.
the first cracks appeared in July. 3 of Marcus's high-risk technology investments began showing signs of instability.
The companies had expanded too quickly, taken on too much debt, and were struggling to meet their ambitious projections. Sarah noticed the problems immediately, but when she mentioned them to Marcus, he brushed off her concerns. "You're looking for problems that don't exist," he told her.
"These companies are innovators. They're disrupting entire industries.
A little volatility is normal for growth stocks." Sarah didn't argue, but she quietly advised her own clients to avoid similar investments. She also began preparing for what her algorithm suggested was coming, a significant market correction that would expose the weaknesses in Marcus's aggressive strategies. By September, the warning signs were impossible to ignore.
Several major economic indicators were flashing red. Corporate debt levels were reaching dangerous heights. Consumer confidence was beginning to waver. Sarah's algorithm was practically screaming that trouble was ahead. She decided to take one more formal approach. She prepared a comprehensive report outlining her concerns and presented it to the senior management team. Her presentation was factual, well-researched, and backed by solid data.
She explained how current market conditions were creating systemic risks and recommended a more conservative approach for all client portfolios.
Marcus was in the meeting that day.
When Sarah finished her presentation, he stood up with his trademark confident smile.
"Ladies and gentlemen," he said, "this is exactly the kind of fear-based thinking that prevents people from achieving real wealth. Sarah sees danger everywhere because she doesn't understand opportunity. While she's worrying about theoretical risks, I'm delivering real results for real clients."
He pulled up his own presentation, showing the impressive returns his strategies had generated over the past 6 months. The numbers were undeniably impressive. His clients had seen significant gains, and the fees generated for the company were substantial. "The market rewards boldness," Marcus continued.
"It punishes hesitation.
Sarah's approach might protect against losses, but it also protects against gains.
Our clients didn't come to us to play it safe.
They came to us to grow their wealth." The room was convinced.
Sarah's warnings were noted but essentially dismissed.
The decision was made to continue with Marcus's aggressive strategies across most of the company's portfolios. Sarah was thanked for her thorough analysis but told that her conservative approach was not aligned with the company's growth objectives. After the meeting, Marcus approached Sarah with a smug expression.
"You know what your problem is, Sarah," he said. "You don't understand that this business is about confidence. Clients can smell fear, and your presentations reek of it.
Maybe you'd be happier in some back-office role where you can worry about numbers all day without scaring away the customers."
Sarah looked at him calmly.
"We'll see," she said simply. That evening, Sarah worked late in her office, updating her tracking systems and reviewing her projections. Her algorithm was now indicating that the market correction would likely begin within the next few weeks. She had done everything she could to warn her colleagues and protect her clients. Now all she could do was wait and document what happened next. She thought about Marcus's confidence, his dismissive attitude, and his absolute certainty that he understood the market better than anyone else. She also thought about the clients who had trusted him with their life savings, their retirement funds, and their children's college money. They had no idea what was coming. But Sarah knew. And she was ready. The first tremor hit on a Tuesday morning in October. Sarah was at her desk by 6:30, as usual, reviewing overnight market activity from Asian exchanges. Her algorithm had been flashing urgent warnings for 3 days straight. The patterns were unmistakable to anyone who knew how to read them. At exactly 9:47 a.m., the technology sector began to crumble. It started with Nexus Innovation, one of Marcus's favorite stock picks. The company announced that their revolutionary new product had failed crucial safety tests, and their stock price dropped 30% in minutes. Within an hour, panic had spread to other tech companies that Marcus had heavily promoted to his clients. Sarah watched her screens with a mixture of professional fascination and growing dread. This was exactly what her algorithm had predicted, but seeing it happen in real time was still shocking. Numbers turned red across her monitors as stock after stock began falling. Marcus burst out of his office, his usually perfect hair disheveled, his tie loosened. "This is just a temporary correction," he announced loudly to anyone who would listen. "Smart money buys the dip. This is an opportunity, not a crisis." He spent the morning calling his clients, trying to convince them to invest more money rather than cut their losses. Sarah could hear him through his office door, his voice growing more strained as the day progressed. "Mr. Peterson, you need to trust the process," Marcus said into his phone. "These companies have strong fundamentals. A little market volatility doesn't change that. In fact, this is the perfect time to double down on our positions." Sarah knew that wasn't true. Her research had shown that most of Marcus's preferred companies were overleveraged and poorly managed. They had been riding the wave of market optimism, but when that wave crashed, they would have nothing solid to stand on. By lunchtime, the Dow Jones had dropped 400 points. The technology-heavy Nasdaq was down nearly 6%. Financial news channels were using words like bloodbath and panic selling. Sarah's phone was ringing constantly, but, unlike Marcus, her clients were calling to thank her. "Sarah, I don't know how you knew this was coming," said Mrs. Chen, an elderly woman whose retirement savings Sarah managed. "When you moved my money to those safe government bonds last month, I thought you were being too careful. Now I'm so grateful." Similar calls came throughout the day. Sarah's clients had been protected because she had quietly moved their investments to safer assets weeks earlier. While Marcus's clients were losing thousands of dollars by the hour, Sarah's clients were weathering the storm with minimal damage. Janet Williams, their supervisor, called an emergency meeting at 3 o'clock. The conference room was tense, filled with worried analysts and angry managers. Marcus sat at the far end of the table, his confidence noticeably shaken. "We need to assess our exposure," Janet began. "This market downturn is affecting all of our high-growth strategies. I want every analyst to review their portfolios and report on potential losses." One by one, the analysts reported devastating numbers. Millions of dollars in client assets had evaporated in a single day. The company's reputation was at risk, and several major clients were already demanding explanations. When it was Marcus's turn to report, he struggled to maintain his usual bravado. "My portfolios are experiencing some temporary losses," he admitted. "But these are paper losses only. When the market recovers, and it will recover, my clients will see the benefits of staying the course." Janet turned to Sarah. "What about your portfolios, Sarah?" "My clients are down an average of 1.2%, Sarah reported calmly. Most of their assets were moved to defensive positions several weeks ago based on market indicators that suggested this correction was likely. The room fell silent. While everyone else was reporting losses in the double digits, Sarah's clients had barely been scratched. "How did you know?" Janet asked. Sarah had prepared for this question. "I've been tracking several economic indicators that historically precede market corrections. The patterns suggested that the current bull market was unsustainable. I presented this analysis to the management team last month, but the decision was made to continue with more aggressive strategies." Marcus's face darkened. "Anyone can look smart when they're predicting doom and gloom," he said defensively. Sarah's clients missed out on 6 months of incredible gains because she was too scared to invest properly. "My clients preserved their capital," Sarah replied evenly. "Which means they'll be able to take advantage of opportunities when prices reach more reasonable levels." Over the following days, the market continued to decline. What had started as a technology sector correction spread to other industries. Energy companies that had expanded too aggressively found themselves unable to service their debts. Retail chains that had borrowed heavily to finance expansion began filing for bankruptcy. Even some financial institutions were struggling as their risky investments turned worthless. Marcus's clients were in panic mode. He spent his days fielding angry phone calls from people who had lost substantial portions of their life savings. Some were threatening to sue. Others were simply withdrawing their remaining funds and taking their business elsewhere. "This is not my fault," Marcus shouted during one particularly heated call.
No one could have predicted this. The entire market is irrational. But Sarah had predicted it.
Her algorithm, her careful research, and her conservative approach had not only protected her clients but positioned them to benefit from the opportunities that the market crash was creating. As other investors fled in panic, Sarah's clients were able to purchase quality stocks at deeply discounted prices. The media began calling it the October correction, and financial analysts were scrambling to explain what had gone wrong. Many of the same experts who had been promoting aggressive growth strategies just weeks earlier were now advocating for defensive positioning.
Sarah found herself in an unusual position.
Suddenly, her conservative approach was being praised rather than dismissed.
Financial journalists wanted to interview her.
Other companies were trying to recruit her. Her quiet competence had been noticed by people who mattered. Meanwhile, Marcus's star was falling as quickly as it had risen.
The clients he had attracted with promises of easy wealth were abandoning him in droves.
His aggressive strategies, which had looked brilliant during the bull market, now appeared reckless and irresponsible. The breaking point came on a Friday afternoon, 3 weeks after the crash began.
Marcus had been called into Janet's office for what everyone knew was a serious discussion about his future with the company.
Through the glass walls, they could see him gesticulating wildly, trying to defend his decisions. When the meeting ended, Marcus stormed out of Janet's office and headed straight for Sarah's desk. His face was red with anger and frustration. Other employees stopped their work to watch as he approached her corner office.
"This is all your fault," he said loudly enough for the entire floor to hear. "You've been sabotaging me from day one.
You couldn't stand that I was successful while you were stuck in your little corner, playing it safe with your pathetic clients." Sarah looked up from her computer screen calmly. She had been expecting this confrontation for days. "You poisoned the management against me," Marcus continued. "You probably even caused this market crash somehow, just to make yourself look good."
"Well, congratulations, Sarah. You got what you wanted."
Sarah stood up slowly, her expression unchanged. Around them, the office had gone completely quiet. Everyone was watching, waiting to see how the quiet analyst would respond to Marcus's public attack. "Marcus," Sarah said in her usual calm voice, "I tried to warn you."
"I tried to warn everyone."
The data was clear, the risks were obvious, and the indicators were all pointing toward this correction.
"You chose to ignore that information because it didn't fit your narrative. Your data was wrong." Marcus shot back. "No one could have predicted this."
Sarah reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a thick folder. She had been maintaining detailed records of her warnings, her predictions, and the responses she had received. Every email, every meeting note, every piece of documentation that proved she had seen this coming. "I have 37 separate documents predicting this exact scenario," she said, placing the folder on her desk. "I have emails warning about the specific companies that have now collapsed. I have meeting notes from presentations where I explained exactly what would happen and when it would happen." Marcus's confident expression began to waver as he realized what Sarah was showing him. "The difference between us, Marcus, isn't that I got lucky," Sarah continued.
"The difference is that I did the work. Real work. Deep research. Careful analysis. While you were focused on looking successful, I was focused on actually being successful."
She picked up another folder, this one even thicker than the first. "This folder contains documentation of every time you dismissed my warnings, every client meeting where you overruled my recommendations, and every strategy decision that prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability." Marcus was beginning to understand that this confrontation wasn't going the way he had planned. "Your clients trusted you with their money, Marcus.
They believed your promises about easy wealth and guaranteed returns.
Now they've lost their savings because you were too arrogant to listen to someone who actually understood what was happening."
The office remained completely silent.
Sarah had never spoken this forcefully before, and her calm delivery made her words even more impactful. "I didn't cause this market correction," she said finally. "I just saw it coming and tried to protect the people who trusted me with their financial futures.
That's what we're supposed to do in this business. Protect our clients, not our egos."
Marcus stood there for a moment, his mouth opening and closing without producing any words. The man who had built his reputation on confident speeches and persuasive presentations had nothing to say. Finally, he turned and walked toward the elevator, his shoulders slumped in defeat. The doors closed behind him, and Sarah sat back down at her desk as if nothing had happened. But something had definitely changed. For the first time in her career at Blackstone Financial, Sarah Martinez was no longer invisible. 3 days after Marcus's public confrontation with Sarah, Janet Williams called her into the executive conference room. This was the same room where Sarah had presented her warnings months earlier, only to be dismissed as overly cautious. Now the atmosphere was completely different. Sitting around the polished oak table were the company's senior partners, including CEO Robert Blackstone himself. Sarah had rarely interacted with the upper management directly, despite working at the company for over 5 years. Her quiet competence had kept her invisible to the executive level, while Marcus's flashy presentations had made him a regular in these meetings. "Sarah, please have a seat," Mr. Blackstone said, gesturing to a chair at the table. "We need to understand exactly what happened here, and it seems you're the only person who saw this market correction coming." Sarah sat down calmly, placing her folders on the table in front of her. She had spent the weekend organizing all of her documentation, preparing for questions that she knew would come. "We've been reviewing the client portfolios," Janet began, "and the numbers are remarkable. While the rest of our analysts are reporting losses between 15 and 40%, your clients are actually showing small gains. How is that possible?" Sarah opened her first folder. "I've been tracking market volatility indicators using a proprietary algorithm I developed during my graduate studies. This system identified several warning signs starting in June, with the signals becoming increasingly urgent through September." She spread several charts across the table, each one clearly marked with dates and projections. These indicators suggested that the current bull market was being driven by excessive speculation rather than fundamental value. Companies were borrowing heavily to finance aggressive expansion, and investors were ignoring traditional risk metrics in pursuit of quick profits. Mr. Blackstone leaned forward, studying the charts. "This data is from June? You've been tracking this for 4 months?" "Yes, sir. I presented my initial concerns to the management team in July, with updates in August and September. Each presentation included specific recommendations for defensive positioning and warnings about the companies that are now experiencing the most severe losses." Sarah opened her second folder, revealing copies of meeting notes, email chains, and presentation slides. Every recommendation was documented and submitted through proper channels. However, the decision was made to continue with more aggressive strategies based on their recent performance. Janet shifted uncomfortably in her seat. As Sarah's direct supervisor, she had been responsible for many of the decisions that ignored Sarah's warnings. "Why didn't you escalate these concerns?" asked Thomas Reed, the company's chief investment officer. "If you were so certain about this market correction, why didn't you push harder?" Sarah met his gaze directly. "I did escalate my concerns, sir. Multiple times. I was told that my approach was too conservative and not aligned with the company's growth objectives. I was advised to learn from Marcus Thompson's methods rather than continue with my defensive strategies." She pulled out a specific email chain and slid it across the table. "This is from my August performance review. Janet specifically noted that my overly cautious approach was limiting my potential for advancement, and that I should embrace more aggressive strategies like those successfully employed by Marcus Thompson." The room fell silent as the executives processed this information. It was becoming clear that not only had Sarah predicted the market crash, but her warnings had been actively dismissed in favor of the very strategies that had caused their current crisis. "What about your clients?" Mr. Blackstone asked. "How did you protect them if the company policy was to pursue aggressive strategies?" Sarah had prepared for this question carefully. "I followed company policy for all official recommendations. However, when clients asked for my personal opinion about their risk tolerance, I provided honest assessments. Many chose to move portions of their portfolios to more conservative positions based on their individual circumstances.
This was technically true, though Sarah had been more proactive than she was letting on.
She had carefully guided her clients towards safer investments without directly contradicting company policy, using her relationships and trust to protect them from what she knew was coming.
"Let's talk about Marcus Thompson," Thomas Reed said. "You worked closely with him for several months. What's your assessment of his strategies and client management?"
Sarah paused, choosing her words carefully.
"Marcus is very talented at client acquisition and presentation. His confidence and enthusiasm were effective at attracting new business.
However, his investment strategies prioritized short-term gains over long-term stability." She opened another section of her documentation. "I have records of 15 specific instances where I raised concerns about investments that Marcus was recommending. In each case, my warnings were either dismissed or overruled. 12 of those 15 investments have now resulted in significant losses."
Janet was looking increasingly uncomfortable.
"Sarah, you never brought these concerns to me directly."
Sarah pulled out another email chain. "Actually, I did. This email from September 14 outlines my specific concerns about the Nexus Innovation investment.
Your response was that I needed to trust Marcus's expertise and support team decisions rather than undermining them with pessimistic analysis." The evidence was overwhelming. Sarah had not only predicted the market crash but had documented every attempt to prevent it. Meanwhile, Marcus's aggressive strategies had been not just permitted but actively encouraged, despite clear warnings about their risks.
"There's something else," Sarah said, opening her final folder.
"During my research, I discovered some irregularities in how certain client accounts were being managed." The room's attention sharpened. This was new information that hadn't come up in previous discussions. Marcus had been making unauthorized trades in several high-net-worth accounts. He was moving clients into high-risk investments without proper documentation or approval, apparently believing that successful outcomes would justify the unauthorized actions. She spread several account statements across the table. These are copies of trading records for 3 of Marcus's largest clients. In each case, he made significant portfolio changes without written authorization, violating company policy and potentially exposing us to regulatory scrutiny.
Mr. Blackstone's expression darkened as he reviewed the documents.
Unauthorized trading was not just a company policy violation, it was a serious legal issue that could result in regulatory sanctions and lawsuits.
"How did you discover this?" Thomas Reed asked.
"I noticed discrepancies while reviewing market data for my volatility analysis.
When I cross-referenced the trading patterns with client authorization records, the violations became apparent."
Sarah had actually discovered Marcus's unauthorized trading weeks earlier, but she had been waiting for the right moment to reveal this information. She knew that her warnings about market conditions might be dismissed as hindsight, but unauthorized trading was a concrete violation that couldn't be explained away.
"Have you shared this information with anyone else?" Janet asked nervously. "No, ma'am.
I wanted to present my findings through proper channels before taking any external action." This was Sarah's subtle way of indicating that she could have reported Marcus to financial regulators but had chosen to handle the matter internally.
The executives understood the implication.
"Sarah," Mr. Blackstone said after a long pause, "I need to ask you directly.
Did you have any personal motivation for documenting Marcus's activities so thoroughly? Any personal conflict that might have influenced your analysis?" Sarah had expected this question.
"Sir, Marcus and I had different approaches to client management and investment strategy.
However, my documentation was motivated by professional responsibility, not personal conflict.
When I identified risks that could harm our clients and the company, I felt obligated to maintain detailed records." She leaned forward slightly, her voice taking on a firmer tone. "The fact is, sir, that our clients trusted us with their financial futures. Some invested their life savings, their retirement funds, or their children's college money based on our advice. When I saw strategies that I believed would result in significant losses, I couldn't simply stay quiet and hope for the best." The room was quiet as the executives absorbed the full scope of what Sarah was telling them. Not only had she predicted and documented the market crash, but she had also uncovered serious policy violations that could have legal ramifications.
"What would you recommend we do now?" Thomas Reed asked.
Sarah had prepared for this moment for months. First, we need to conduct a complete review of all portfolios managed by Marcus Thompson to identify unauthorized trades and assess our regulatory exposure. Second, we should implement the defensive positioning strategies I outlined in my previous presentations to protect our remaining client assets. Third, we need to establish better risk management protocols to prevent this situation from happening again. She paused, then added, and fourth, we should probably prepare for client lawsuits and regulatory inquiries.
The unauthorized trading alone could result in significant legal action.
Mr. Blackstone nodded grimly. Sarah, I want you to work directly with our legal department to document everything related to the unauthorized trading.
Janet, I want a complete review of all risk management protocols. Thomas, start implementing defensive strategies across all our major accounts immediately. As the meeting concluded, Sarah gathered her folders and prepared to leave.
Her quiet competence had finally been recognized, but the cost had been enormous. Millions of dollars in client losses, regulatory exposure, and the destruction of several careers. Sarah, Mr. Blackstone called as she reached the door.
Why didn't you just leave? When your warnings were ignored and your expertise was dismissed, why didn't you take your skills somewhere they'd be appreciated? Sarah turned back to face him. Because my clients trusted me, sir. I couldn't protect them if I wasn't here.
As she walked back to her corner office, Sarah reflected on the events of the past few months. Marcus had been right about one thing: this business was about confidence.
But real confidence came from competence, not charisma.
It came from doing the hard work, making the difficult decisions, and protecting the people who counted on you. Tomorrow, she would begin the process of rebuilding client portfolios and implementing the risk management systems she had been advocating for months. But tonight, she would finally allow herself to feel satisfied that the truth had been revealed. 6 months after the October correction, Blackstone Financial looked like a completely different company. The open floor plan remained the same, but the energy and dynamics had shifted dramatically. Sarah Martinez now occupied the corner office that had once belonged to Marcus Thompson, complete with glass walls and a commanding view of the trading floor.
The transformation hadn't happened overnight.
The weeks following Sarah's revelations to senior management had been intense and chaotic. The legal department had worked around the clock to address the unauthorized trading violations. 3 major clients had filed lawsuits against the company, specifically citing Marcus's reckless management of their accounts. Regulatory investigators had conducted a thorough review of the company's practices, resulting in substantial fines and new oversight requirements. Marcus Thompson was gone, his departure negotiated quietly to avoid further scandal. He had been stripped of his securities licenses and faced personal legal action from several clients. The last anyone had heard, he was working at a car dealership in another state, his financial career effectively over. But the story that mattered most was what had happened to the clients. While Marcus's former clients struggled to recover their losses, Sarah's clients had not only weathered the storm but emerged stronger than before. Her careful positioning during the market crash had allowed them to purchase quality investments at deeply discounted prices, setting them up for significant gains as the market eventually recovered.
Mrs. Chen, the elderly client whose retirement savings Sarah had protected, had become something of a celebrity in the financial press.
Her story of the quiet analyst who had saved her life savings had been featured in several newspapers and financial magazines. She often stopped by the office to bring Sarah homemade cookies and to thank her again for her careful stewardship.
You know, Mrs. Chen had said during one of her visits, my husband always told me to judge people by what they do when they think no one is watching. You were protecting my money when everyone thought you were just being too careful. That's real character. The media attention had been overwhelming at first.
Sarah had never sought publicity, and the sudden spotlight was uncomfortable for someone who had spent her career working quietly in the background. But she had used the attention strategically, advocating for better investor protection and more conservative risk management practices throughout the financial industry. Her algorithm for predicting market volatility had attracted interest from major financial institutions and academic researchers. She had received job offers from companies across the country, each one offering substantial increases in salary and responsibility. But Sarah had chosen to stay at Blackstone Financial, partly out of loyalty to her clients and partly because she now had the authority to implement the changes she believed were necessary.
As the new chief risk officer, Sarah had restructured the entire investment approach.
Gone were the days of aggressive, high-risk strategies designed to generate quick profits. In their place, she had implemented comprehensive risk assessment protocols, conservative growth strategies, and transparent communication with clients about potential risks and realistic returns.
The changes had not been popular with everyone.
Several analysts who had built their careers on Marcus's high-risk model had left the company, unable to adapt to the new emphasis on careful research and conservative positioning. But the results spoke for themselves. Despite the overall market volatility that continued throughout the year, Blackstone Financial's clients had achieved steady, sustainable growth while competitors struggled with ongoing losses. Thomas Reed, the chief investment officer, had initially resisted some of Sarah's changes. He had built his reputation during the boom years when aggressive strategies had generated substantial profits. But, as the market remained unstable throughout the year, he had come to appreciate Sarah's methodical approach. "I have to admit, Sarah," he had told her during a recent strategy meeting, "your boring approach is looking pretty smart right now. Our clients are happy, our regulatory compliance is solid, and we're actually growing our business while our competitors are losing clients." The comment about her boring approach might have stung in the past, but Sarah had learned to take pride in being boring when boring meant being right. Her success had given her confidence in her own judgment and the courage to stand firm on her principles even when others disagreed.
Janet Williams had also undergone a transformation.
As Sarah's former supervisor, she had been deeply embarrassed by her role in dismissing Sarah's warnings. She had requested a transfer to the compliance department, where her attention to detail could be used to prevent the kinds of problems that Marcus had created. The move had been good for both of them, removing the awkwardness of their reversed roles while allowing Janet to contribute her skills in a more appropriate area. The most satisfying change for Sarah had been the implementation of her client protection protocols. Every investment recommendation now required detailed risk analysis.
Every portfolio change needed written client authorization.
Most importantly, the company had adopted a client-first philosophy that prioritized long-term financial health over short-term profits. On this particular Friday afternoon in April, Sarah was preparing for what would be her most important presentation yet. The International Association of Financial Advisors had invited her to speak at their annual conference about risk management and client protection. Her story of predicting and surviving the October correction had become a case study in business schools and professional training programs. As she reviewed her presentation notes, her assistant knocked on her office door.
"Ms. Martinez, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he says it's important."
Sarah looked up, curious. Her calendar was carefully managed, and unexpected visitors were rare. "Send him in, please." To her surprise, Marcus Thompson walked into her office. He looked different from the confident, well-dressed man she remembered. His expensive suit had been replaced by a simple business outfit from a department store. His flashy watch was gone, and his once perfect hair showed signs of stress and premature gray. "Hello, Sarah," he said quietly.
"Thank you for seeing me. I know I don't have the right to ask for your time." Sarah gestured to a chair across from her desk. "Please, sit down. How can I help you?"
Marcus sat down heavily, his shoulders slumped with exhaustion.
"I wanted to apologize," he began.
"Not just for that scene in the office, but for everything. You were right about the market, you were right about the risks, and you were right about my methods." Sarah listened without interrupting, curious about what had brought him here. "I lost everything," Marcus continued.
"My job, my licenses, my reputation. Some of my former clients are suing me personally. I had to sell my house, my car, everything. But that's not why I'm here." He looked up, meeting her eyes for the first time since entering the office. I'm here because I finally understand what you were trying to tell me. This business isn't about being the loudest voice in the room or making the flashiest presentation. It's about protecting people who trust you with their lives. Marcus pulled out a newspaper clipping from his jacket pocket. It was an article about Mrs. Chen and her successful retirement portfolio, managed by Sarah throughout the market crash. I read this article, and I realized that while I was focused on winning, you were focused on being worthy of that trust. Mrs. Chen gets to retire comfortably because you did your job properly. Mr. Peterson lost half his retirement fund because I was more concerned with looking successful than actually protecting his money. Sarah remained quiet, allowing him to finish. I wanted to tell you that you were a better analyst than I ever was, and probably a better person too. I also wanted to ask if there's any chance you might consider giving me a recommendation for a compliance position somewhere. I know I don't deserve it, but I've learned my lesson, and I want to do something positive with whatever's left of my career. The request surprised Sarah. 6 months ago, Marcus had been her biggest professional rival, dismissing her expertise and undermining her authority. Now he was asking for her help to rebuild his ruined career. Marcus, she said carefully, what makes you think you'd be good at compliance work? He gave a rueful smile. Because I know exactly how people try to cut corners and bend the rules. I spent years doing it myself. Maybe I can use that experience to prevent other people from making the same mistakes. Sarah considered his request. The Marcus Thompson sitting in her office was clearly a changed man. The arrogance and dismissive attitude were gone, replaced by genuine humility and what appeared to be authentic remorse. I'll need to think about it, she said finally. A recommendation from me would carry weight in this industry, and I take that responsibility seriously. If I recommend you for a position, I'm vouching for your character and your commitment to proper practices. I understand, Marcus replied. I know I have a lot to prove. But I want you to know that watching what happened to my clients, seeing the damage I caused to people who trusted me, that changed me. I never want to be responsible for that kind of harm again. After Marcus left, Sarah sat in her office thinking about the conversation. The man who had once told her she was too cautious, too scared to achieve real success, had just asked for her help to restart his career. The irony wasn't lost on her. Her phone rang, interrupting her thoughts. It was Mrs. Chen, calling with an update on her latest portfolio performance. Sarah, dear, I just got my quarterly statement, and I can't believe these numbers. My account has grown more in the past 6 months than it did in the previous 2 years. How do you do it? Sarah smiled, looking out at the busy trading floor where her team was working quietly and methodically to protect their clients' financial futures. I just try to remember what my job really is, Mrs. Chen. It's not to make myself look smart or successful. It's to make sure you can sleep well at night knowing your money is safe. As she hung up the phone, Sarah reflected on the journey that had brought her to this point. She had started as the invisible analyst in the corner office, dismissed as too cautious and too quiet to succeed in the aggressive world of financial services. But her patience, her careful research, and her commitment to protecting her clients had ultimately proven more valuable than all of Marcus's flashy presentations and confident promises. The phrase, he said, "You lost," she smiled and revealed what he failed to protect, had become something of a motto in the financial press when discussing her story. But Sarah knew the real victory wasn't in proving Marcus wrong or in gaining recognition for her expertise. The real victory was in the retirement accounts that had been preserved, the college funds that had been protected, and the trust that had been honored even when no one was watching. She had protected what Marcus had failed to protect, the financial security and peace of mind of ordinary people who had trusted them with their most important possessions. And, in the end, that protection had proven to be worth more than all the quick profits and aggressive strategies in the world.